Good morning, Pelham Road. Well, this morning our sponsor is the YouTube station of Pelham Road. YouTube Pelham Road. Now, we only have 13 subscribers, but the good news is we only had 4 last week, so we've tripled in a week. So if you're not already a subscriber, go and subscribe to YouTube at Pelham Road and tell your friends about it. Maybe we can triple it by next week. Something I saw on the internet the other day that I would like to encourage you with is a broadcast called SGN, Some Good News. It's very funny, it's very insightful to the times that we live in. It's done by the guy who was Jim on The Office, you know, the guy that loved Pam. So you'll enjoy it, you'll laugh, you'll be inspired, and if you're like me, you'll cry. So go check it out, Some Good News. It should not be forgotten that Jesus was a Jew. I point that out to Christians all the time. He was not a Christian. When he was killed, the label which hung above his head was King of the Jews. Now, I suspect that the high priest didn't really consider Jesus a very righteous Jew. And this was probably the sentiment around most Jewish tables, that they didn't think much of Jesus being very dedicated or faithful. In some ways, I guess people would argue that he was. In some other cases, which I'm about to read, it was obvious that he wasn't. This is from one of his biggest fans in the book of Mark, chapter 2. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was hungry and in need of food? He and his companions, they entered the house of God, and they ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for anyone but a priest. And then he gave some to his companions. And then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." And then later, this event happened. He left that place and entered their synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Well, tell me, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" They were trying to accuse him. Jesus said to them, "Well, suppose one of you has one of your sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out of the pit? How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." And then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other hand. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against Jesus, trying to find a way to destroy him. If Jesus fans reported that Jesus chose people above the Sabbath, can you imagine what his enemies said? Some people may debate it, but I'm going to say it. Jesus was not very religious. So if Jesus was not religious, really what was his message? I believe we can safely say that Jesus believed the rituals of the religion he was aware of, and consequently all other rituals, were pretty vain and empty. Jesus preferred for our experience to come from our heart. Quoting the prophet Isaiah, Jesus says, "This people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." Then Jesus added, and this is Matthew 15, "In vain they worship me, teaching as their doctrine the precepts of men." So fasting, Sabbath keeping, and all the rest was vain, because it did not come from a serious attachment, a reaction from the heart. Jesus found much in common with the prophets of the 8th century. Hosea 6:6 seems to provide much of the foundation for the Jesus syllabus. "I desire steadfast love to sacrifice, the knowledge of God to burnt offerings." Sacrifice and burnt offerings, that was religion. It was orthodoxy. It was what you were expected to do if you were a religious person. But Jesus is unafraid of confronting the practices that were empty. Jesus was the enemy of religion that was without mercy and void of love. As Jesus opposed religion and religious authorities, he clearly had a new way to encounter the holy. It was as simple and as difficult as you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The revolution Jesus was ushering in was one of love. Love from the heart. 2,000 years later, this is still hard for us to get our heads around. No one who has ever loved will think Jesus is lowering the standard. For one, I'd much rather go back to going to church 48 out of 52 Sundays and making a sacrifice of praise to convince God that I loved him than to actually love other people, extend mercy, offer forgiveness, turn the other cheek, and love God not with just 2 or 3 hours a week, but with every waking moment of my life. To love God fully is to let my checkbook reveal my love. It is to let my relationships reflect this love. It is to open my heart to be vulnerable. Then it is to rise and do it all again the next day. Oh, how I long for the days when I could bring a spotless lamb or say the sinner's prayer and be done with it. But Jesus ended those days because he calls us to love.